Madam Managing Director, welcome back to CNBC. It's great to see you here.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
So let's begin with what you're doing back here in the UAE. The World Government Summit now underway. What's your role and focus here?
The World Governance Summit brings together policymakers and business people from all over the world. And the concentration is on something that is core for the IMF, how to have strong fundamentals for economies to perform well and to create opportunities for private sector to flourish. I am particularly interested also to meet bilaterally with many of the leaders that are here to talk about specificity of policy decisions they are making today in the context of a world economy that has performed remarkably well given all the circumstances. Inflation is going down. Growth at around 3% means that soft landing is forthcoming. But this 3% growth is anemic. We need economies to grow much faster. And for this, we need policies that encourage productivity growth and broad economic growth. We also have here regularly the Arab Fiscal Forum. And we talk about ways in which countries can raise more revenues and improve the efficiency of spending. All of this goes into the direction of good governance pays off.
One of the major headwinds to growth, at least in our region, is the fact that this conference takes place against the backdrop of conflict. The Israel-Hamas war, of course, still ongoing for many months now. What do the latest numbers tell us about the economic impact of that war so far?
Of course, the most tragic impact is on people. But there is also impact on the economy. It is mostly regional, terrible for the epicenter of the war. We have seen the Gaza economy contracting by 80% and the West Bank economy contracting by 22%. There is also impact on Israel, although much less profound. We have seen impact on the neighboring countries. Tourism has shrunk, and for all the countries, for Jordan, for Lebanon, for Egypt, this is a very important source of revenues. Jordan has done quite well. We also have a program, $1.2 billion support program for Jordan. Lebanon is affected quite dramatically, and it was in very bad conditions to begin with. We are in discussions with Egypt. We also see the impact on the movement of goods. Now we have inflation finally going down. We certainly don't need factors that can push inflation up. So far, the impact of the disruptions in the Red Sea do not quite translate into global significance. Very significant for Egypt, though, because traffic via the Suez Canal has shrunk almost by half. And Egypt relies on revenues. They were $700 million per month, now significantly less. So when we look at this crisis, the most important message we have is please bring peace, and through peace, stability. The longer this conflict goes, the higher the risks of more spillovers.
Are you seeing enough political will to bring a peaceful resolution to this conflict? And at the same time, you mentioned the attacks in the Red Sea. Is enough being done today to safeguard commercial ships and to ensure free transit in that critical waterway to avoid what could be an inflationary risk or a supply chain shock?
Yeah. Well, we are all scared of supply risk shocks because we have seen the consequences. The main reason inflation skyrocketed was because of supply side shocks. This, as I said, is not yet the magnitude that has global significance, but it is not negligent. And while we see that efforts are being made militarily to stabilize the travel via the Suez Canal, we all recognize that the best way is not to have the conflict in the first place. Therefore, it is about political will to get to peace. We see a lot of engagement, and I hear from the leaders in the region a very high commitment to find a path to a political solution. As long as we don't have it, the risks of spillovers remain.
Can I ask you about the other war also unfolding? What are Ukraine's funding needs this year?
$42 billion. This is what Ukraine needs to sustain the remarkable progress they have made. And let me state it as clearly as possible. Ukraine earned the support of the international community with very prudent actions domestically. They collect 36% to GDP in taxes. I don't know many countries that do that even without the war. They brought inflation down from double digits, from 27% to 5%. They have restored the prospects for growth. Growth is now 4.5%. If we pull this support, we risk all these gains that have been made to be lost. Fortunately, the EU has come up unanimously with 50 billion euros package in support of Ukraine, and I very much hope that the US Congress will come to a decision that would provide this very valuable support for Ukraine that is expected from the US.
Are you concerned, though, that the political environment in the United States at the moment, in the lead up to the November election, isn't necessarily conducive for that funding? Ukraine is certainly a more controversial issue on the agenda for US lawmakers right now. That's a problem, isn't it?
I hope that the logic is fairly clear. The US, as well as many others, have made an investment in Ukraine. The American people are pragmatic. You want return on your investment, and return on your investment is for Ukraine to retain and improve its position. So that pragmatism hopefully will lead to the right decision. And I also can say that looking from the perspective of the IMF, Ukraine that fights for international order, for respect of sovereignty, is actually fighting not just for Ukraine. They're fighting for the world to be a more stable place and a better place for business for everybody.
Ukraine's funding needs are increasing, but one of the other more notable adjustments you've made with regards to the IMF numbers lately have been in Russia itself, where we've seen the growth outlook being upgraded, the GDP growth outlook, to 2.6%, which is more than double the pace of what the IMF predicted in October. Does that tell you that Western sanctions against Russia aren't working if the economy continues to improve?
What it tells us is that this is a war economy in which the state, which, let's remember, had a very sizable buffer built over many years of fiscal discipline, is investing in this war economy. If you look at Russia today, production goes up, military, consumption goes down. And that is pretty much what the Soviet Union used to look like. High level of production, low level of consumption. I actually think that the Russian economy is for very tough times because of the outflow of people and because of the reduced access to technology that comes with the sanctions. So although this number looks like a good number, there is a bigger story behind, and it's not a very good story.
The reason I ask is because President Putin told an American interviewer last week that, look, the US and the tools that it's using simply aren't working against Russia. So what do you make of that? And also, in that interview, what do you make of President Putin's attempts to justify this war?
Look, I as a European, not as the head of the IMF, Europe has gone through horrific wars, and they always started with the military power attacking a neighbor, and then the rest of the world sitting on the sidelines. The consequences, the whole world in flames. So I think that it would be very unfortunate if the world decides again to turn an eye on a military power invading a neighbor. I know the history of our part of the world. As a Bulgarian, I can tell you that in the 8th century, Bulgaria was a big power in the region, great Bulgaria, with land that was 4 times bigger than what we have today. What we have today is Bulgaria today. And I think we all have to be respectful of where we are today and who we are today.
Not looking back onto ancient history, so to speak.
You look back in ancient history, good to know it, but act on where we are as a world today and recognize that peace is much better than the alternative for everybody.
Just a few other questions before I let you go. The next is on the election in Pakistan, where the IMF has a really significant funding package. Are you concerned by the claims of vote rigging and the suggestion that this was not a free and fair election? And it has been said that, of course, the first order of business for the next government will be negotiating a new IMF package before the current one expires. Can you update me on your current thinking around that negotiation?
We are bound by our articles of agreement to concentrate on the economy and to not get involved into the politics in countries. We respect the sovereign choice of people, and there are competent institutions that can judge on the type of election and how election has gone. Where we see Pakistan today is a country that still needs tremendous support to reform its economy. Pakistan collects around 10% plus minus of GDP in taxes. We judge an economy as functional when it collects at least 15% of GDP in taxes. Looking at the mismanagement in some of the sectors, the Pakistani people know it. The partners we have had, they recognize they have problems to solve. And I am very committed to continue the work with Pakistan. This last program, actually, the interim government has done a good job to bring Pakistan in a better place. And what we want is see who is going to be in the government. We have been talking to everybody in Pakistan for a long time, and then decide on a program that would address once and for all some of the macro problems the country is facing, for the sake of the Pakistani people.
So you'll commit to those negotiations once a government is in place?
We will be available to the government when it is in place so we can discuss a credible program. If we have a committed partner, we can do so much. You know how it is when you are far behind. The advantage, the positive is you can go a long way.
Just finally, Madam Managing Director, on China, we've seen more talk about market stabilization measures, but clear concern now about the outlook for the economy and, of course, the volatility that we've seen in Chinese equity markets. What's your take on the situation in China, and is Beijing doing enough to limit the downside losses there and losses potential?
We have been advising the Chinese authorities to use more of the fiscal space and broadly policy space, also monetary policy space they have. We have seen them taking some steps in that direction. What we also discuss with China is the longer-term structural issues that the country needs to address. Our analysis shows that without deep structural reforms, growth in China can fall below 4%, and that would be very difficult for the country. So what we are looking forward to see in China is a determination to take on some of the outstanding elements of reforms, and that means continue with the openness of the economy, continue with the reform of state-owned enterprises, address deeply the real estate sector difficulties, address the high level of local government debt, reform the pension system. Why? Because we want to see the economy genuinely moving more towards domestic consumption and less reliance on exports. But for that, confidence of the consumer, and so that means fix the real estate, get the pension system in place, as well as this longer term improvements in the fundamentals of the Chinese economy would be necessary.